Well, it looks like they're going to start the meeting a little late today, like always. So if you want to go ahead and drop your comments, I'll put them on the screen. And until then, let's hear a little more jazz. Well, I guess I can't quite see what's going on there, but we'll figure it out.
planning to speak or are comfortable sitting in the gallery, I would like a few folks to go upstairs into the gallery seating. Thank you.
Okay, it looks like we're going to be waiting for the vote for a little bit. I guess they were speaking for a while. So right now they've taken roll, and there are 2 excused absences. Everyone's present, but Rachel Moore Green, and Representative Rachel Moore Green, and Representative Nirbit. So as soon as they, I guess, get organized and get seated, they're going to start the proceedings. And let's see how great this goes. All right, while we're waiting, let's go ahead and recap what's happened so far. They held a special committee for December 21st, 2021, or 2020, this afternoon, a couple hours ago. You can watch that live stream on my feed somewhere.
Excuse me, Smith, quorum is present. Messages from the Senate.
Here they go.
Madam Speaker, I am directed by the President to inform you the Senate has passed House Bills 5001, 5029, 2120, 2158, 2330, 2341, 2607, 3051, 3138, 3234, adopted HCR 12, 1320, and concurrent House amendments and repassed Senate Bill 580.
Committee reports. Committee report file number 154 has been distributed. When the House recessed, we were under the order of business of third reading of Senate bills. I'm going to request that the House return to the order of business of final reading of memorials and resolutions. The chair requests unanimous consent to suspend the rules to temporarily return to the order of business of final reading of memorials and resolutions. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. We are now under the order of business of final reading of memorials and resolutions. The chair requests unanimous consent to suspend the rules to read House Resolution 3 for a final time and to consider the measure immediately. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. The clerk will read House Resolution 3 in its entirety.
House Resolution 3. Whereas Article 4, Sections 11 and 15 of the Oregon Constitution direct the House of Representatives to determine its own rules of proceeding and to discipline its members, and whereas the House of Representatives adopted rules of proceeding when it convened an organizational session on January 11, 2021, And whereas House Rule 3.07 is among the rules adopted by the House of Representatives during its organizational session, and whereas House Rule 3.07 was also in effect for the 3 special sessions conducted in 2020, including the special session held on December 21, 2020. And whereas House Rule 3.07 establishes safety and entrance protocols for the state capitol building, and whereas these safety and entrance protocols were adopted by the House of Representatives to combat the novel coronavirus pandemic that, as of the date of this resolution, has taken the lives of more than 2,600 Oregonians and more than 590,000 Americans, and that has sickened millions. And whereas House Rule 3.07 and other legislative rules limit entry to the Capitol to authorized personnel in order to minimize the risk of transmission of the virus. And whereas the Legislative Assembly was scheduled to convene in special session on December 21, 2020, and whereas on December 16, 2020, a video was posted on an online website that shows Representative Mike Neerman describing a scenario where demonstrators could break into the Capitol and obtain unauthorized access to the Capitol with assistance from someone already inside the Capitol. And whereas in describing this scenario, Representative Neerman supplied a cell phone number and instructions on where to stand and what to text in order to obtain entrance to the Capitol. And whereas the cell phone number Representative Neerman supplied was his own. And whereas on December 20, 2020, a group named Patriot Prayer posted a sign on its Twitter account calling for a demonstration at the Capitol the next day and stating, in relevant part, "We need to have 1,000 people there and make our voices heard. Non-permitted flash mob." And whereas on December 21, 2020, Capitol security camera video footage shows Representative Neerman opening a locked exterior door of the Capitol while the House was in session and exiting the Capitol. And whereas the security camera video footage shows that when Representative Neerman exited, he pushed the door open and stepped around a demonstrator who rushed past him into the building, followed closely by a second demonstrator who held the door open for numerous other demonstrators who also rushed in. And whereas none of the demonstrators were authorized personnel under House Rule 3.07, and therefore the demonstrators' breach of the doorway and occupancy of the Capitol was a violation of House Rule 3.07. And whereas the demonstrators were heard chanting "enemies of the state" and "arrest Kate Brown" inside the building. And whereas law enforcement officers attempted to push the demonstrators out of the Capitol, but demonstrators repeatedly dispersed chemical irritants against the officers before officers were able to regain control and repel the demonstrators. And whereas demonstrators damaged Capitol property prior to and during the confrontation with law enforcement. And whereas authorized personnel present in the Capitol described the events as intense and stressful, terrifying and distressing. And whereas law enforcement officers were visibly injured and shaken due to the demonstrators' actions. And whereas an independent investigator unaffiliated with the legislative branch conducted an investigation of the conduct of Representative Neerman on December 21, 2020. And whereas the investigator reviewed security camera video footage and other relevant documentation, interviewed 8 impacted parties, and sought to interview Representative Neerman, who declined to be interviewed. And whereas the independent investigator determined that it is more likely than not that Representative Neerman intentionally aided demonstrators in breaching Capitol security and gaining unauthorized access to the Capitol, leading to injury and property destruction. And whereas Representative Neerman was arraigned on 2 misdemeanor charges stemming from his actions on December 21, 2020. And whereas the criminal prosecution against Representative Neerman is ongoing. And whereas Article 4, Section 15 of the Oregon Constitution vests the House of Representatives with the authority to determine whether the conduct of a representative is disorderly behavior and to punish a representative for disorderly behavior. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the State of Oregon that we, the members of the House of Representatives of the 81st Legislative Assembly, find that Representative Mike Neerman has engaged in disorderly behavior within the meaning of Article 4, Section 15 of the Oregon Constitution. And be it further resolved that with the concurrence of 2/3 of the members of the House of Representatives, Representative Neerman be expelled from the House of Representatives and the Representative Neerman seat be considered vacant.
Thank you, Lacey. The question now arises upon final reading and consideration of House Resolution 3. Representative Holvey.
Madam Speaker, House Resolution 3. Impossible to overstate the seriousness of the reason we're here tonight. The gravity of this charge should not be lost on any of us. We're here tonight under the authority of Article 4, Section 15 of the Oregon Constitution, which states, either house may punish its members for disorderly behavior and may, with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member, but not a second time for the same cause. The publicly available evidence, including Representative Neerman's own words, has made it clear that Representative Mike Neerman engaged in disorderly behavior by enabling armed violent protesters to enter the Capitol, breaching the security of the Capitol, which was officially closed to the public, and endangering authorized staff and legislators inside this building. As a reminder, on December 21st, 2020, the legislature in order to vote on a final package of COVID relief bills before the new year. As has been the case since the start of the COVID pandemic, the Capitol was only open to authorized personnel following guidance from the Oregon Health Authority, Oregon Health Science University, and regulations from Oregon OSHA. The special session, like the full session we are currently in, was conducted in accordance with the Oregon Constitution's requirement for openness and transparency. In fact, because of our remote access, Oregonians have been able to participate in this session like no other before it. If you'd like to read Legislative Council's opinion on the constitutionality of the Capitol operations, there's a document posted on OLS. On the morning of December 21st, a couple hundred protesters, some of them heavily armed and wearing body armor, arrived at the Capitol for a protest with the intent to illegally enter and presumably occupy the building and interrupt the proceedings of the Oregon legislature. Just before 8:30 a.m., Representative Mike Neerman left the House floor, walked to the west ADA entrance of the Capitol, and opened the door and allowed protesters to enter the building. They quickly began engaging in violence against state troopers, including the use of bear mace against troopers, causing them to fall back and allowing protesters to come further into the building. Had law enforcement not stepped in so quickly, we can only imagine how disastrous the results would have been. 6 minutes after opening the door to the protesters and after chatting with protesters outside, Representative Neerman returned to the building through the west entrance on the State Street side. At this time, protesters were violently clashing with the state police as they were trying to gain entry to the building. All of this happened while the House of Representatives was conducting business on this very floor. Thankfully, Oregon State Police were able to contain and then eventually remove the rioters who entered the building by closing off the vestibule area outside of the rotunda. But clashes continued throughout the day, including attacks on journalists outside the Capitol. Eventually, 4 people were arrested for their actions that day. What was the goal of the protesters? In the words of protest organizer Joey Gibson of the extremist group Patriot Prayer, it was to occupy the Capitol. We showed the video of his words in committee today. For those of us in the Capitol, it was a frightening day. Most of you were here. Armed protesters yelled angry personal threats at legislators through windows, promising to find out where they lived. Protesters attempted to break into the building, including using nearby construction equipment or materials, I would say, to bash in a glass door. In total, the attacks caused well over $2,000 worth of damage. Staff and legislators were terrified. We can only speculate what would have happened if they were able to get all the way in. It wasn't long before it became apparent that Representative Neerman had been the one to open the door to let the protesters in. After all, it was all on video. The questions became, were his actions intentional? Were they premeditated? Were they done in coordination with violent protesters, other individuals, or organizations? A couple of weeks later, Patriot Prayer's Joey Gibson revealed on Parler that a state rep opened that door for us. Not someone had happened to exit the door and we were able to sneak in, but a state rep opened the door for us. Again, we showed that video in committee and it's posted for the official record. And then, of course, it was only last week that we learned there was, all this time, a confession of sorts directly from Representative Neerman. On December 16, 2020, just 5 days before the events at the Capitol, Representative Neerman explained something he called Operation Hall Pass. He described how he would enable protesters to enter the Capitol illegally by texting him personally and be waiting for the door to be opened for them. Just days ago, Representative Neerman appeared on the Lars Larson radio show and admitted it yet again, saying that his comments on December 16th were, quote, setting up that day. In other words, setting up what happened on the 21st. Colleagues, it couldn't be any clearer. Mike Neerman had intentionally allowed armed protesters, occupiers, to illegally enter the building during the peak of the pandemic. He coordinated with his supporters and extremist groups and then opened a door to let them in, leading to attacks and injury of state troopers, destruction of Capitol property, and trauma for many of those in the building that day. He has been charged by the Marion County District Attorney with the official misconduct in the first degree and criminal trespass in the second degree. The charging document is also posted on OLIS, the Oregon Legislative Information System, if anyone would like to read it. The framers of the Oregon Constitution left the definition of disorderly behavior to succeeding generations. Not really a definition that needs to be spelled out or defined. It is a declaration by this body whether they consider a behavior to be disorderly. Not a definition, it's the legislators' decision on whether they consider it to be disorderly behavior. It's for each of us to define through our votes, based on the evidence before us. For me, it couldn't be clearer. Representative Neerman engaged in disorderly behavior and should be expelled. Colleagues, it is sad to have to do this, but it is also our obligation, our responsibility to uphold the legislature's integrity. Colleagues, I urge and I vote.
Thank you, Representative. Please start the 1-minute clock for consideration of House Resolution 3. Thank you.
Well, it looks like they're taking the vote. They actually read the entire resolution, which I think is pretty good. Normally, they just read the title. So they're voting on it now, and I guess I'll just wait along with everyone else with bated breath. Okay.
We are now under consideration of House Resolution 3. And before we go on to further discussion, I'm going to make a motion that, if approved, would suspend the 5-minute time limit for Representative Neerman, so he has an unlimited amount of time to speak this evening. The chair requests unanimous consent to suspend House Rule 6.30 sub 1 for Representative Mike Neerman only on discussion of House Resolution 3. Is there any objection? Hearing none, so ordered. Further discussion on House Resolution 3. Representative Neerman.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the resolution.
To the resolution.
First of all, I appreciate the time extension. I won't be using it, but thanks. That's a nice gesture. And the people of the state of Oregon have the right to instruct their legislatures, and the deliberations of this body are open. It says so right in the Oregon Constitution. Article 1, Section 26 says, "No law shall be passed restraining any of the inhabitants of the state from assembling together in a peaceable manner to consult for their common good, nor from instructing their representatives. nor from applying to the legislature for redress of grievances. And Article 4, Section 14 says the deliberations of each house, of committees, and of each house or joint committees, and of the committees of the whole shall be open. You might not agree with my reading of the Constitution, the same way that maybe I don't agree with the representative from the Emerald Empire's definition of disorderly. You may not believe the Capitol should be open to the citizens of this state during this session. You might believe that a big screen TV on the front steps makes it open, or virtual meetings, even though not everyone has internet, which is why we have to raise taxes so that everyone can have broadband. But I guess people who don't have broadband won't be able to participate in the virtual sessions. I guess they can go down to their library and get it on the internet there, but I forgot their library's closed, but I digress. Now you're considering expelling a member for the first time in history because he thinks that people should have access to their capital, especially during session. I think that the citizens of Oregon should be able to instruct their representatives. I think people from interest groups and industries should be able to apply to the legislature for redress of grievances in person, in the building. It's June 7th, June 10th, and we're 3 weeks from the end of session, and the building is still closed to the public. We're all good after this session. We're all going to go out to dinner or stop at the grocery store, or maybe tomorrow we'll shop and buy clothes or get our oil changed, because all these places are open, but not this building. You can let this be tried in the media and come down to summary judgment on the floor like we're doing here. You can choose to skip the House Committee on Conduct and just do it now. There's no reason to hear both sides and have at least something resembling due process. The party in power doesn't have to be fair. Might makes right. So if that's what you want to do, let's do what the people have sent us here to do. Let's decide. That's what we do. We're deciders. Let's decide, and let's do it in front of the people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Knowles.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the resolution.
To the resolution.
Madam Speaker and colleagues, this is a very somber moment. Now, human survival, it relies on our ability to work together and cooperate for a common purpose. Whether it's coming together to raise children and families or groups, build a house or a school building or a city, or run a state. The ability to cooperate at least sometimes, in spite of difference, is vital. We all know that the ability to have self-governance and democracy is still relatively young in human history. And I think as we observe across our planet and even in our own country, it is fragile. And here's the thing. Democracy, humanity, and ultimately civilization rely on the consent of the governed, especially some modicum of consent from those that don't agree. How else do we have civilization if we cannot suppress our disagreement now and then? Colleagues, I often wish that politics was more revered in our society, but I can opine on that lament for another time. This process right here on this floor is the formal problem-solving process in our society, in our culture, and in our state, and it needs to be able to work and be revered and respected at some level, especially among those of us that engage in it so actively, so that we can come together to raise children and families or groups, build houses or school buildings or cities, and run a state. Now, for example, and I ask you to bear with me, colleagues, this being Pride Month, Madam Speaker, you and I have had to live our lives in a society that said my love and my relationship, because I chose to romantically and emotionally love a man and not a woman, and you, a woman, Madam Speaker, was less than. And while I resented that, that resentment didn't give me the right to threaten our democracy and people's lives to achieve a different end. Instead, it obligated me to use our democratic process to work to change it. Madam Speaker, Representative Neerman and I are part of the class of 2015. We were freshmen together, and believe it or not, I felt a bond with him at least in my first term. He had the desk that is now occupied by Representative Campos. And there were moments in our first term together where we would visit and share and even joke about being here. He moved away to a different desk in our second term, and we have not been in any committees together, so we've kind of lost touch. But I still have memories of him from my first term. And believe it or not, when my constituents ask me about Representative Neerman and his politics, I actually share good things about him, things about our shared humanity. For example, I think we're both Roman Catholics. At least I believe that because he shared with me that he almost became a priest. Now, Madam Speaker and colleagues, until the video came out, there was a part of me that just wanted to believe that Representative Neerman was just moved by the moment and did something very dangerous and rash out of a surge of anger and emotion. Now we know that not so much. As I said at the beginning of these remarks, democracy relies on peaceful problem solving. Even where there is passionate disagreement, and believe me, I know something about passionate disagreement as I've worked most of my adult life at labor unions and have occasionally contemplated tactics that put powerful people in awkward and uncomfortable situations, but ultimately never in harm's way. Never in harm's way. If we're to have a functional democracy and self-governance, the ability to suborn anger and a momentarily or even a lingering urge to harm the people you disagree with, it has to be part of your psyche. I can't understand why a man who joked with me about our vast political differences, discussed being Catholic, talked about bills and processes that we didn't understand because we were both freshmen, who shared with me that my husband and I were the first gay couple that he and his wife had ever met when we went to the governor's mansion, would somehow not be able to see my humanity, even if he did not agree with my politics, and think that opening a door to very angry people, many of whom were armed and avowed white supremacists, many who seemed to be intent on causing harm and destruction, that was somehow okay.
Excuse me, Representative. Representative Evans yields his time. Please continue.
Madam Speaker, I'm sad. I'm sad it has come to this. And I'm sad that I didn't keep in enough touch with Representative Neerman because maybe, I believe, naively, but I do believe that in being in relationship, he would have made a different choice. I'm sad that I believe he has shown so little respect for the rule of law, the safety precautions from disease the pandemic required, and the process of democracy for working out our differences, and ultimately for our shared humanity, that he put all of our lives in danger. You're lucky, Representative Neerman. We're all lucky. It could have ended much worse. I'm thankful for the men and women that protected all of us that day, and for my colleagues who will take a more courageous vote to expel Representative Neerman, as this will not be a difficult vote for me, Madam Speaker. But for those who it might be, I still urge an aye vote. Because ultimately in this process, you have a right to the process and your views, but not to the detriment of my views and the views of others and our safety as we engage in the process of coming to a decision and resolving our political difference.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion on the resolution? Representative Salinas.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the resolution.
To the resolution.
Colleagues, I want to point to a few of the whereas clauses in the resolution. Whereas these safety and entrance protocols were adopted by the House of Representatives to combat a novel coronavirus pandemic that, as of the date of this resolution, has taken the lives of more than 2,600 Oregonians and more than 590,000 Americans, and that has sickened millions. And whereas House Rule 3.07 and other legislative rules limit entry to the Capitol to authorized personnel, in order to minimize the risk of transmission of the virus. And whereas the Legislative Assembly was scheduled to convene in special session on December 21st, 2020. I stated this in committee earlier, and it's worth reminding everyone why we were in the Capitol on December 21st. This was the worst point of the pandemic. We were regularly seeing well over 1,000 cases and double-digit death totals each day from the virus. We were months away from vaccines being widely available. We needed strong public health measures in place, but we had to take legislative action given the scale of the crisis. Thousands were facing down the risk of eviction at the end of the year. Restaurants desperately needed aid during the worst weather months of the year when indoor dining was no longer an option. And we needed to continue funding critical pandemic-related programs to support Oregonians and provide additional support to those impacted by the devastating Labor Day wildfires. And while many of us were working across the aisle to deliver on relief for Oregonians who were most impacted by the pandemic and wildfires, Representative Neerman was planning and coordinating an attack on our Capitol. He not only put our safety in jeopardy of this work to help Oregonians at risk. And again, reciting directly from the resolution, whereas authorized personnel present in the Capitol described the events as intense and stressful, terrifying and distressing. And I repeat, terrifying and distressing. Those are strong emotional responses to fear. The trauma of that day will not leave with Representative Neerman, especially for BIPOC legislators and the staff in the Capitol. Sadly, Representative Neerman has refused the calls of this entire body to resign. Expulsion is the only reasonable course of action. I urge an aye vote on House Resolution 3.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Fahey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the resolution.
To the resolution.
Madam Speaker, the Oregon Constitution explicitly allows the House to punish its members, including through expulsion, with a 2/3 vote of the House. The 60 members of this body have the sole and solemn responsibility of determining what is meant by disorderly behavior under the Oregon Constitution. There is no definition in the Oregon or the U.S. Constitution. This decision is ours and ours alone. I personally came to my decision to support H.R. 3 by reviewing the facts of this case, as well as the historical precedents of expulsion in other states and in the U.S. Congress. While expulsion is rare, it does happen. There have been recent cases in New York, Colorado, Arizona, Arkansas, and North Dakota that I have studied and that have informed my decision. I also frankly do not believe that Representative Neerman has shown true accountability and ownership over his actions, which has also informed my position on this resolution. Madam Speaker, we have heard references to due process tonight, and I want to talk a bit about that. Due process requires that the legislator being expelled be given formal charges, adequate notice, and a meaningful opportunity to be heard and to respond to the charges against them. Some of the other states that have expelled members in recent years have not necessarily used as robust of a process as we have in this case. But it's clear to me that those criteria have been satisfied here with the formal charges in the resolution introduced on Monday, the opportunity for Representative Neerman to testify in the committee and to participate in the debate tonight without time limits. I also want to share a little bit about the events of that day and how they impacted me. On December 21st, I watched the events unfold from my 4th floor office, overlooking the patio on the northwest side of the building. I listened to people screaming at the office windows, enemies of the state, traitors, and we hate you. It was unlike any Capitol protest I have ever seen. That morning, as those who attempted to break into the Capitol deployed pepper spray and pulled the fire alarm, I rushed frantically through the building to make sure that no legislators or staff were at risk. And then in the early afternoon, I ran to my window and looked down to see men having taken a long piece of railing or metal and using it as a battering ram to break down one of the doors to the Capitol. And then I saw a journalist being pushed and shoved by protesters as they yelled at him. And as that was happening, I had no idea whether these protesters were going to do him serious harm. After the events of that morning, events set in motion by Representative Neerman's actions, stunning numbers of riot police arrived at the Capitol to keep the people in this building safe. And I must admit that seeing dozens of police in riot gear in the rotunda of this building was shocking and frankly dystopian. I'm grateful for that work today, and I'm incredibly dismayed that it was necessary. Madam Speaker, this is potentially the most serious and historic vote any of us will ever take in our career as legislators. After reviewing the evidence in this case, as well as the research and writings on disorderly behavior, expulsions, and due process, I have come to the decision to support House Resolution 3, and I urge my colleagues to do the same.
Thank you, Representative. For the discussion on the resolution. Seeing none, Representative Hovey, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just briefly, I think that, we make a lot out of a question always arose about how do we define disorderly behavior? And as Representative Fahey just expounded, there is no definition. And on purpose, there's no definition. Disorderly behavior is a declaration by the members of this body in this context. The Constitution, Oregon Constitution, grants the power to the branch to determine the rules around how it will convene. I disagree with Representative Neerman's characterization of the Constitution. In fact, all the legal opinions that we've sought disagree with that interpretation. And as I stated before, there is evidence, or at least legal opinions on OLIS to that regard. And the fact that Representative Neerman disagrees is not really the issue here. The issue is that Representative Neerman, or anyone else that believes they have a legal case for objecting to the rules of this body on constitutional issues, could have filed a legal challenge to resolve that. But Representative Neerman, nor any of those groups that were involved in this altercation and breach of the Capitol security, did not do that. Instead, they attempted to violently storm the Capitol, to occupy it. And they received premeditated, coordinated help from Representative Neerman. Representative Neerman displayed a total disregard of the rule of law and the principles of democracy that this institution and institutions around this country are founded on. It's okay to disagree, but to demand that you are right and to try to achieve your righteousness through violence has no place in this state, in this country, and definitely not in this body. Representative Neerman is facing 2 criminal charges related to his actions. And colleagues, though there is no definition of disorderly behavior, and it is our decision to decide whether his actions are or are not disorderly behavior, a common layperson could just look up in the dictionary and look up the definition of disorderly. Around the time our Constitution was framed, most likely our framers were looking at the Oxford languages in that dictionary. And part of that definition states that disorderly is involving or contributing to a breakdown of peaceful and law-abiding behavior. Maybe at a later date, Merriam-Webster, as some people prefer, has a definition part of disorderly that states it is causing a problem, especially in a public place, by making a lot of noise, behaving violently, etc. Colleagues, I believe any common interpretation of Representative Neerham's actions by the average person would call his egregious conduct disorderly behavior. So, colleagues, though it may be somber and may be sad, it is our responsibility, and I want to reiterate that, it is our responsibility and obligation under the tenets of democracy and under our Constitution to take action and to protect the integrity of the legislature and the safety of those who work and serve in this building. Colleagues, I urge an aye vote on House Resolution 3.
Thank you, Representative. Those of the opinion that House Resolution 3 should be adopted will vote aye. Those opposed, no. The clerk will open the voting system.
Well, it looks like the vote's being taken, and it's
Resolution
going to
3,
be
having
yay
received
59.
Constitutional required majority is declared adopted. I direct the chief clerk to notify the Secretary of State that House District 23 is vacant. The House is now back under the order of business of third reading of Senate bills. Chair requests unanimous consent to suspend the rules. Carry over the Senate bills remaining on today's third reading calendar to the Monday, June 14th, 2021.
Well, that looks like it's it. Representative Neerman has been expelled from the Oregon House. It's historic, and the seat is now vacant. So thanks for joining me, and we'll try to do this again with less technical difficulties. But really appreciate people who voted, who joined the broadcast, and we'll have to do this again sometime. Looks like we'll be clocking it out at exactly 1 hour, and appreciate you coming with us. Let's see how this progresses in the future. It should be, the process now is candidates will be nominated by county PCPs, Republican County Precinct Committee people, and they will forward their nomination to county commissioners of Polk, Yamhill, Benton, and Marion counties. So they'll have these four counties approve the nominated candidate from the Republican PCPs that live in the district, in House District 23. So it should be about a 6-week, 2-month process, and we'll be following that along. We'll see what happens. Great to have you guys, and we'll see you in the future.